Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Welcome, everyone. I hope you're all having a great day. I'm here actually in Texas at TLA today. And so out my window, I think there's an hour left of the the exhibit hall. And so it's been an exciting week. And I can't think of a better way to kind of wrap up TLA and my week, having two of my favorite librarians joining me for this great conversation, reconsideration process from complaint to conclusion. And so I'm really excited for this today. Go ahead to the next slide, Martha. My name is Shannon McClintock Miller, and I'll show you my information in a second, but this is the bit.ly that you can actually jot down and get to these slides and the resources that we're going to share. I know that the ladies have great things that they're going to share today, and so you'll want to make sure that you have the bit.ly, and it's just FRL April webinar. And so you'll be able to get to all of our things from there. So as I said, my name is Shannon McClintock Miller. I am the District Teacher, Librarian, and Innovation Director at Van Meter Community School in Van Meter, Iowa. I also serve as the Future Ready Librarian spokesperson. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Shannon M. Miller. And I also blog at the Library Voice, and I put my email in here in case you have any questions or need anything. I'm always happy to help.
Let me unmute myself. I muted myself so that you guys don't hear the dogs in the background. So if you do hear dogs in the background, those are my two. I'm very sorry. I'm Elissa Malespina. I am a teacher librarian from Verona High School. And I am also a member of the South Orange Maplewood Board of Education. So I am the only person in the state of New Jersey and one of the only few in the nation who is a librarian and also a school board member. So I bring this unique perspective of being on both sides of the issue. I do need to say that the views are my own and not those of the SOMSD BOE. I'm also going to throw in of the Verona Board of Education to this. That's the legal disclaimer I need to say as an elected official. But I'm so excited to join everybody today.
And good afternoon, everybody. I'm Martha Hickson. I am a librarian at North Hunterdon High School in Annandale, New Jersey. You can find me on Twitter at sassy_librarian for as long as I can stand being on Twitter under its new manifestation. And my email address is on the screen as well.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today and for sharing your information. If you have questions too, we're going to try to end at about 4:45. And so if you have questions, you can use the hashtags or even things that you want to share that the ladies are talking about in today's webinar. You can use Future Ready Libs or Future Ready or both of them. And as always, just use those to stay connected on Twitter and even on Instagram as we're sharing. But we'll end, and so you can use the chat for questions or even keep them to the time that we have to ask them questions. But there's a lot to talk about, and so I'm going to let you take it away, Martha.
Actually, I think Alyssa's going to start us off.
Oh, good.
I'm starting you up. So where we're headed. So the whole idea of this is that you're going to go to get a behind the scenes look at what happens if there's a challenge or if people have questions about a book, a resource material, a display, anything like that that happens. You're going to get to hear from Martha, who has been through this as a librarian. You're going to get to hear about it from me, who has been an administrator. I'm no longer one, but also from me as a BOE member. And then sort of what you can do to prepare, and then we'll be taking questions and answers. So we've got a number of things coming your way.
So to get started, I'll just give you a little background about with the challenge that we're going to talk about is one that took place at my school, North Hunterdon High School. It is in suburban Northwest New Jersey, about an hour from both Philadelphia and New York City. We are a 2 high school district. In our school, there are roughly 1,500 students. The school is very highly rated by New Jersey Monthly Magazine. It's considered one of the top high schools in the state. 69% of our kids go to 4-year colleges. Another 16% go on to 2-year colleges. So college is the destination for most of our kids. And we had ourselves a little challenge this year. Started back in September, on September 28th to be specific. That was the date, a Tuesday, of our board meeting. The principal had gotten word that there was going to be an objection to the book Genderqueer at that evening's board meeting. He came to see me around noon to alert me. I supplied him with reviews of the book, a copy of our reconsideration form, a copy of our policies, and I reminded him of the process because we had been through this before, not too successfully, but I'll get to that later. And I figured he had it well in hand. I went home, and that night my husband and I tuned in to watch the meeting via live stream. And in fact, 2 books were objected to in the meeting, Genderqueer and Lawn Boy, and also Banned Books Week. It happened to be Banned Books Week when this happened. The protesters also objected to Banned Books Week. And they did all of this, of course, in the usual way by reading out of context passages, the most sensational stuff they could find with as many F-bombs in it, and read that aloud to the board. Imagine my shock, though, amidst all of this, to hear my name mentioned. And I was accused in front of the board in public as a pornographer, pedophile, and groomer of children. The video of that meeting has since been viewed more than 5,000 times on YouTube. Great. Because I had been through a book banning situation in 2019 at my school, I knew what to do. So while the meeting was happening, I had this very phone in my hand, and I immediately started alerting the authorities from my point of view. That would be the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom, the National Coalition Against Censorship, the National Council of Teachers of English, and the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, all of whom have online reporting forms. So I got in touch with them immediately. I also emailed my union leaders, let them know it was happening, and said, I need to see you the next day. And then that next day, in addition to having all kinds of meetings, I also reached out to my community allies. In my prior challenge in 2019, I had formed a little group of folks in the community that I knew I could count on. I tapped them right away, and I also reached out to some of the key students that I knew might be interested in this. And you'll see on the slide, it says NHVIFF. That core group of allies that I had back in 2019 formed a little organization called the North Hunterdon Voorhees Intellectual Freedom Fighters. We had a website back in 2019. We dusted that sucker off and got that rolling again for the new fight ahead. Now, I mentioned policies as the thing I handed to my principal, and Elissa's going to talk a little bit about the importance of those.
Yeah, policies are probably your biggest ally in this fight, because there are 2 policies in that are really going to become stuff that you need to become familiar with. The one is the selection policy, and it's what's in your collection. What is your resource materials? What are your instructional materials? You will have a policy that talks about that. In the state of New Jersey, it is number 2530. So but every school district has something called basically resource materials or an instructional materials policy. And in that policy, it basically says to you, what as your district believes should be in your collection. So what are the beliefs of the district in terms of how the collection development looks like? So you want to make sure that that policy includes information on having diverse resources, and resources that vary not only by religion and ethnic, but also cultural groups. And also diversity of gender, gender identity, and sexual orientation. In the state of New Jersey, which, you know, both Martha and I are from, there are a lot of state laws that deal with those issues and state curriculum policies that deal with that. So your policies as a school board member, when I write policies, it all has to go together. So like we have to follow the state laws and our policies must. And then the other policy is, okay, you've had it, you know, here's, somebody is now challenging me. So there's a 9130, which is called the public complaints policy. And that's for how does a school district handle a complaint? So you want to write those in a way that makes it very clear exactly how a complaint is going to be handled, who you're going to allow to complain, what happens if there is a dispute, what happens if there's a grievance. And your district needs to make those very clear because that's very important. I will tell you, in the state of New Jersey, neither of these policies, selection or reconsideration, has been updated in over 20 years. So because of that, they are weak policies. And if you as a school district don't enhance them and make them better, what's going to happen is when a complaint happens, the first thing you do is you go to the policy. And if the policy is not good, the chances of the complaint being able to move further, or there being misinterpretations, or it being vague enough that things can happen, become better because you haven't updated your policies to make it better. And, you know, Martha can talk a little about that. Ironically, when I wrote the policy for South Orange Maplewood, I used a lot of the resource materials policy I used from Martha's policy because she had a great one going on. She has a really good, like, one that talks about diversity and, you know, and so when this complaint happened, I was like, oh my God, your selection policy is great. But the problem is her reconsideration policy or her public complaints policy hasn't really been updated. So that's where, you know, things got into a little bit of trouble.
And the policies are only useful if they're actually used and followed, but that's a whole other story. The other thing you heard me mention when I was watching my name being dragged through the mud that night on the 28th was contacting people. And so I have a tool that I put together during that first 2019 situation. I call it the Advocacy Alliance brainstorming tool, which just kind of helped me organize all the people I was reaching out to. But you don't have to wait until a challenge to think about who would you call. So this tool, which will be linked for you and is linked in the slides, just kind of walks you through in an organized way, who could I reach out to in my school, in my community, what social and political influencers could I contact, and what about library and intellectual freedom advocates? And I've populated some of those for you already. And when you're doing this, think big. You don't have to know these people personally. And especially in that social and political influencers column, are there people in the popular culture whose word might be impactful, who could help you? And you'll see an example a little later on of somebody I reached out to who's on my wish list, and it worked out. Don't limit yourself.
So I don't want to interrupt Martha, but I'll give you people an example. So like if you are being accused, like in her case, of LGBTQ books, both of them were LGBTQ books. Well, most organizations in most states have like state organizations that are geared towards LGBTQ rights. So you might not always think of them, but they can be very helpful because they're the ones who are lobbying and doing all the work related to that. So, you know, reach out to people like that or others. You know, what is the content of the challenges? If your challenges are diversity related, NAACP, ACLU are, you know, those organizations might also be very helpful too for you.
So we'll continue walking through this timeline of the challenge. And now we're heading into October and the heat really got turned up. In the days after the board meeting, the protesters lodged official challenges, not against 2 books, but against 5. All Boys Aren't Blue, Fun Home, which coincidentally is the one that I fought for in 2019. That's what the prior challenge was about. Genderqueer, Lawn Boy, and This Book is Gay. The district formed a reconsideration committee, one reconsideration committee for 5 books. That's problematic. And their next board meeting was scheduled for October 26th. Leading up to that meeting, hate mail started arriving for me at work. And those messages were calling me disgusting, sick, truly disturbed, on top of the pedophile, pornographer, and groomer stuff. The administrators in my building were not supportive. In fact, they were actively accusatory and antagonistic, asking me things like, how can we have books with language like that in our school, as they clutched their little pearls. We had students who were in support of the protesters who started engaging in nuisance vandalism in the library, hiding books, intentionally misshelving books, all having to do with the LGBTQ experience or gender issues, because all 5 of these books deal with that. The protesters attempted to have charges pressed against me with the county prosecutor's office. Thankfully, that did not go far. And in the meantime, I continued fighting. I researched and compiled what I called resumes for each of these books. And there's an example linked for you here for This Book is Gay. So basically, I went out and I grabbed every review I could get, all of the awards. And actually, if you're a tidal wave user, that's a really good place to dig in for awards, because you'll find some stuff in there that you don't necessarily know about if you do a dive deep into the record. And the best of lists that it appeared on. And all of these books had beautiful resumes by the time I was done. And my community activists were getting ready to mobilize for that October 26th meeting. But on October 20th, I had what can best be described as a breakdown at work. I was responding to a hate mail from a parent. At the same time, the business office called me and they had an Oprah request and they wanted me to research all the purchase records associated with these books. The students from the Gay Straight Alliance showed up in my office and they wanted me to give them a list of books that were about straight students that had sexual scenes in them. And I had to talk those kids back off the ledge. And when they left my office, I did not feel well. It's not the kids' fault. It's just my body reacted in ways it had never had before to stress. My blood pressure was through the roof. I was crying. I had trouble talking. I had been experiencing intestinal problems, sleep deprivation, anxiety, and I had a breakdown. My husband had to come and pick me up from work. So that was not good. And we'll take a look here. This is our complaint policy. And Elissa, if you want to talk about, it mandates with the Reconsideration Committee. I talked about the Reconsideration Committee being formed.
Right.
And there's some issues with this.
So what's also important is just because you have a policy 9130, which is your public complaints policy, you also need to make sure that you have regulations related to it. And in that, those regulations, you need to talk about like, who's on the reconsideration policy? Who are the people, like, how exactly does it work if you have a challenge? Like, what is the process people have to go through? Who can be the ones producing the challenge? You know, in South Orange Maplewood, we made it so that, and this is a little controversial, and is that only students or parents of people, of kids in the district can be the ones who challenge, because we are seeing outside groups come in that have no knowledge of the district, have no say in the district, have no means, and start to come in and challenge books. So we wanted to make it so that if you have a vested interest in the district and your child is using those books, then you have every right to file a complaint about those materials and books. But if you don't, you shouldn't. So we looked at that. We looked at exactly who, how does this work? In the wakelet that I tweeted about, and that, I think we put the resources in this document too. I have my public complaint regulation that is, spells everything out for you. I also have both of the policies but like I put for hers, the person, if I'm looking here, who's missing is a student. I have students on mine. Our committees in South Orange Maplewood, if there is, we have two sets of committees. One's that's school-based. So we have one that is school-based first. And then if that doesn't, end it there, then it goes to a different one. But we have a school media specialist. We have the principal or a designee. We have at least one teacher. If there was excluding a teacher involved, if there was, we have one parent or guardian in that person. We have a student member of a student member of the school's student council. And we even say that for elementary kids, because by 5th grade, these kids can be a part of that. So like, we want that now at the height, if it makes it up to like step 4 or 5, where we're getting to like a district level challenge, then we have the assistant superintendent of curriculum, the, assistant superintendent in South Orange and Maplewood of equity and access. We have another school administrator, a parent or guardian, a teacher, the librarian, and the student board of ed member. Because we have board of ed members that are students are going to be on this committee too, because they, those are the people who should be a part of it. So you really need, you think like, oh God, I don't need to like list all this stuff out, but you do. It becomes really important because I'm telling you, school boards and board of eds and superintendents will put people on committees that they know are going to side with them. Even parents that they know are going to side with them. So unless you make it very clear exactly how the committee is set up, those reconsideration committees, which you think are going to help you, might not unless you lay them out correctly.
And even when it's laid out clearly, despite the flaws that exist in this policy, it is clearly laid out. As I said earlier,
Yeah.
it's only good if the people responsible follow it.
Yeah.
In my case, item 5 here clearly says that the committee should include a layperson knowledgeable in the area of the work. Despite my advising the administrators both verbally and in writing that was a requirement, they decided that it had to be a layperson who was knowledgeable regarding the nature of the complaint. No. So what the person they appointed to satisfy that role was the head of the booster club, Aaron is the head of the booster club, who has a number of children in the school. So they felt that she would be an expert on obscenity. Anyway, they did so at their own risk, because if this had gone to litigation, that would have shown them to be willfully trying to avoid the policy. Moving on in our lovely little timeline, by November, there was no decision from the Reconsideration Committee. We were still pretty much in waiting mode. There continued to be protests at the board meeting, and our community supporters came out again in November. That October board meeting was enormous. About 400 people showed up for that, almost entirely opposing the book ban. Again, a very large turnout in November. What happened shortly before that November meeting was in Fairfax, Virginia, which also had challenges to lawn boy and genderqueer about a week before we did, a little earlier in September. That Reconsideration Committee rendered a decision, and in my view, did a really beautiful job of documenting their process and sending out the report. So if you're looking for an example of what a good Reconsideration Committee report looks like, go to Fairfax, Virginia. But my point in mentioning this, while you're fighting your own battle, keep your eyes on what's happening outside. So I was able to take this headline and the documentation that Fairfax published, and I sent it to my administrators because my experience, and perhaps yours is too, that administrators don't like to be the first or the only. So if they can see, oh, well, somebody else did that, maybe I can have the courage to defend a book too. It might give them some comfort. Elissa, what's your experience as either an administrator or a BOE member about awareness or concern about what's going on in other districts?
So this is a huge one. And this is one that led to us making the change in our policy, is that I was able to say to the school board members, it's not a matter of if at this point, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. And we, for once, have the chance to be proactive instead of reactive, because so often school boards are like having to be reactive after something comes at them, that when you have the ability to be proactive, it's a huge thing. And with these policies that haven't been updated in 20 years, and technically there's no new law. So I'm going to step back for 1 second so people understand. Policies get updated only at a school board level, 99% of the time, only if there is a law or something changes for that to happen. And then we will get an alert. We will then get, usually school boards pay for a company that comes in, like gives us a new draft of the policy. We look through it, make changes to make it, fit our needs. But that's how policies usually work. Policies don't get changed if there's no new law or anything saying that is happening. So you can go 20 years without a new change in a policy. But you also don't have to. There is nothing saying as a school board, you can't go and look and go, oh, that policy is a little outdated. Maybe we should switch it. And that's what we decided to do in South Orange and Maplewood, is I really talked to them about like, hey, look at these headlines. We're seeing it everywhere. We know we are a target and that there's a good chance it might happen here. So let's get ahead of this and be one of the people who are leading this movement instead of sitting back and waiting for it to happen. And then we're like, oh my God, our policies are out of date and we're stuck like in this situation where none of us want to be in. So I think that's how you have to approach people with that.
So moving forward in our timeline of terror, I was able to return to work. My doctor authorized me right after Thanksgiving. And immediately I headed to Atlantic City, where the New Jersey Association of School Librarians was having its conference, which was very restorative for me. I felt the librarian love, which I needed to feel. But equally importantly, I made a connection there with John Kratzka from everylibrary.org. If you are not on board with Every Library, get there. Yes. They're doing wonderful, wonderful work. And John was sort of my consigliere for the next 6 weeks. I mean, working personally with me day to day to help me fight this. And he is one of the default people that I have on that Advocacy Alliance template for you. So the contact information for him is right there. So that was an important meeting. Sometime about a week after that, I have to be vague here, we believe that the Reconsideration Committee finished its work. I have to be vague because they didn't date anything. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And there was no board meeting. There was a board meeting scheduled for the end of December. They canceled it. So I'm like, I can't let this go with no communication. So we launched a holiday greeting card campaign on our North Hundred and Voorhees Intellectual Freedom Fighters site. We put up the 2 templates you see at the top. Seasons readings was the message. And when you open it up, it just asked board members to give students the gift of intellectual freedom. So people could download those cards and send them. I sent my own card. You'll see that down at the bottom, because all this time, the board said nothing about the defamatory charges made against me. There was no comment from the board whatsoever. I wanted my reputation cleared by my employer. So I sent every board member this little greeting saying, all I want for Christmas is my reputation. I did not get my Christmas wish. So Elissa, in terms of being a board member and getting communication, what makes for an effective communication from the community to the board?
That is such a great question, because now I'm on the other side of it. The amount is important. Like at one point, and I connected with every library a long time ago, John and I are close. He's like such a dear friend. When we were fighting in South Orange, Maplewood to keep librarians, I started a like campaign, and we just kept sending emails to everybody to the point where I basically overloaded the email system, because they were getting so many emails. Like when you're getting a lot of emails at you, you're like, oh God, I gotta pay attention to this. So that's in like as many times as you can do that. But I will say that after the first like 30 or 40 like generic ones, it's like, oh, here's another one. And you sort of just stop going through it because, oh yeah, they don't want the whatever, you know? And so the personalized, the more personalized, the better. The more I always respond back, or I'm always touched by students who are speaking out to me, because they're the people who are in charge. So if I'm getting something from a student, if I'm getting stopped at the grocery store or in town by people, okay, that's something that's gonna hit me, you know, a little more. If we're getting public pressure from township committee people or others that you might not always think about, who are like, what's going on? That's gonna be a little more important. I think it's got to be like a combo of things, but I just don't think you can always stay with like, oh, we did a change.org petition, because with a change.org petition, you're just signing something, but it doesn't come to me personally. So I get a little thing that says 5,000 people signed it. While great, don't get me wrong, every library one where I'm getting an email every time is going to be much more impactful to me than one that just is like, we just got a change.org one, and it's, you know, all those people. Does that make sense? I hope that.
Yeah, I get you. So the January meeting is usually a nothing meeting. It was January, but was two meetings actually in January. January 4th was a reorganization meeting where they're swearing in new members of the board. And like I said, it's usually just kind of nothing. And kind of like a drive-by, even for the board members. They're like, ooh, we're going to be in and out in an hour.
Yep,
and
that is.
My thought around that was, I'm not going to let any opportunity pass me by. And I kind of figured that the book banners would think it was a nothing meeting too. So we wouldn't have them as a distraction. So I marshaled my friends from the New Jersey Association of School Librarians, and they delivered a couple of really wonderful messages to the board. They spoke to the board, as did I. And some of my community members from the intellectual freedom fighters. And that was great, because it was the first meeting since September where there was no chaos. There was no nonsense from the other side, who were very poorly behaved at these meetings, I might add, screaming and ignoring time constraints. So it was a nice civilized meeting. We could make our points clearly without distractions, and it was quite nice. Now, Elissa, you're a relatively new member of your board.
I am.
So how does a new board member get up to speed with ongoing issues like this? How would our new board members have gotten up to speed? And what's the most effective way for us to approach a new board member?
That is great. That's such a great question. New board members come in. It depends on the onboarding process that goes on from the people, like the president of the board, to everybody. I didn't have that much of an onboarding process, but I also am an educator. So for me, I was able to easily pick things up and know what, but you have to remember that these new board members coming in, if they're not educators and all of that, they're very overwhelmed. They're hearing all of this edu speak. They're seeing all of these things. They're getting, you know, bombarded. It's hard to figure out exactly like what I can say, what I can't say. It becomes this weird situation. So as much as you can explain to them in as plain English as possible, taking away all that edu speak and explaining exactly why this is important, the better. if you have a chance before, because remember in New Jersey, a lot of the board members are elected in November, but they don't start until January. So if you know they're coming on board, get an opportunity to have those parents that, you know, ask those parents to meet with them one-on-one for coffee or something so that you can talk to them about, you know, so they can understand where people are coming from. You know, anything that you can do in a personal manner to make it as personal as possible is going to be better for them. But also you want them to be like, you have to make things very easy for people to understand and the message easy to understand, because most Board of Ed members are not educators. And we forget that because we're so used to speaking in edu-speak that a lot of times I have to spend time going to my board members and being like, no, this is what it means.
Great tips. So January 25th was the Decisive meeting. That's when everything came to a head. That was a Tuesday. Our board meetings are always on Tuesday. Friday before that board meeting, the report of the Reconsideration Committee, the mysterious Reconsideration Committee, their report was published. That report recommended, remember we had 5 books, recommended retaining 4 and said they wanted to get rid of 1. They wanted to get rid of This Book is Gay. They were ready to dismiss that with 134 words. There are the 134 words to get rid of This Book is Gay. Well, I took a deep dive into that report over the weekend, and it was, let me tell you, a mess. Remember, I told you nothing was dated. There's no dates on it. There was no reference whatsoever to any of the policy selection criteria that they were supposed to use to evaluate the book. It was based solely on opinion. There was no evidence from the text. It lacked balance. There were spelling errors, grammar errors, factual errors. If it was a work submitted by a kid, you know, for a grade in school, they would have gotten an F. So I knew, it gave me some comfort that even if they went after this book and the board decided to remove it, there would be lots of room to go after this report. But I thought, I'm not going to let it die. So I scrambled over the weekend and I did a couple of things. Remember I said earlier about set your goals high in terms of who you're going to contact. I don't know why it took me till that weekend, but maybe because I knew This Book is Gay was finally on the precipice of being kicked out the door. But whose name is on the cover of This Book is Gay, along with the author Juno Dawson? The person who wrote the introduction for the North American edition of This Book is Gay is David Levithan.
Yep.
New Jersey native, well-known young adult author. And I'm like, how do I get in touch with David? So I went, what do? Librarians know everything, or they know how to find everything. I reached out to my NJSL posse and said, does anyone have a connection to David Levithan? I did this on a Saturday morning. Within 2 hours, David Levithan and I were exchanging messages, thanks to my New Jersey librarian posse. Yeah. And he agreed to write a letter for us. He asked that a student read it rather than him. He said a student is going to be more impactful than me reading it. He wrote a beautiful letter for us, which I had a student read at the Decisive board meeting that Tuesday. In the meantime, I also created a scorecard, which you see here, that community members could download to keep track of the vote, almost make it like a spectator event. And this is important because it lights a little fire into the board members too, to say, you know, this isn't just you're deciding on a book, you're deciding on the future of your board career here, because people care passionately about the First Amendment. So there are some people who are going to have to worry the next time their name gets on the ballot. And I also made arrangements over the weekend, finalized to have a range of speakers at that January meeting. Strangely, COVID worked to our benefit. Because the meeting was held virtually, I was able to reach out, and some of our students who are recent alumni were able to participate. And let me tell you, they did a beautiful job. So beautiful that all 5 books were retained. Yay! The best part was, even though the Reconsideration Committee had recommended getting rid of This Book is Gay, because their work was so sloppy and poorly done, every public speaker at the meeting commented on the slovenly work of the Reconsideration Committee, and even the board itself said there were 3 people who abstained. They said they couldn't vote on the basis of this poor work product. So 3 abstained, refused to vote, 2 voted to ban it, and the remaining 7 said retain. Of course, I was watching from home again via live stream, and I literally wept buckets of tears, partly from joy, and I think it was a huge part was relief. It felt like a ton of bricks had just fallen off of my shoulders. So let me just move forward here real quickly and let you know that there is an epilogue. Remember that the work that the Reconsideration Committee did was a mess, that there were lapses in following policy and process. So the intellectual freedom fighters, within days of that board meeting, wrote a 17-page report to the board outlining all of those issues. And my point here is, and the reason I have Yogi Berra on the slide is, it ain't over. Even when you think it's over, it ain't. So if they had kicked this book is gay to the curb, there were so many red flags in that Reconsideration Committee's work. We could have gone after them on any one of these things: the composition of the committee, their failure to use the selection criteria, the complete absence of any evidence and data. There were inaccuracies. They were making judgments based on imbalanced information, 14% of the book, whereas they ignored the other 86%. Process and timeline issues. Consistency. They praised the other 4 books for certain qualities and used those same qualities to condemn this book as gay. Their ignorance of intellectual freedom and their failure to comply with certain state regulations in getting rid of that book. So we had lots of opportunity if we needed to go after them. So that was immediately after. We have yet to have a response from the board to any of that. You may have seen around that same time, the end of January, I did an article for School Library Journal, which had reached out to me in November. They were looking to hear from a librarian who was going through this, and that was me. It generated a ton of support for me, especially outside of New Jersey, because my experience was new to a lot of folks around the country. And remember, I'm still a pedophile, pornographer, and groomer as far as public opinion is concerned. The board had yet to say anything about me. They exonerated the books, but not me. Well, once this article came out and people from around the country and plus my own community members started peppering the board with emails about, okay, what about Martha? Finally, on February 22nd, the board declared the charges against me to be unfounded. Not exactly the exoneration I was looking for, but I'll take it. So I'm an employee with distinction for 17 years. It took me 5 months to get 3 syllables out of this board. And even then it wasn't unanimous. Behind the scenes, there were board members who objected to the reading of the statement. And because the work was so poorly done by the Reconsideration Committee, the board directed in March the administration to create a template that will be used for all future reconsiderations. Of course, the administrators delegated that work to me. I'm like, okay, I'll do that for you. And in addition, by the way, I have also developed a proposal for a new reconsideration form. I have a whole separate presentation on that, which requires much more robust criteria in order to get into the reconsideration process. As Elissa stated, our reconsideration regulation needed some work, so I have drafted a new version of that. Unfortunately, I may get a chance to road test all this stuff pretty soon, because just last week, I got another message from a community member. This time, 16 books are listed, including the 5 we just went through. And we had a board meeting last night and the book banners were back. They didn't mention any of these 16, but they continued to go after the library as a concept, continue to characterize the library as a center for pornography, pedophilia, and grooming. So I'm not done.
So that's horrible, but that's partially why in our processes, in your whatever complaints documents that you make, you need to put that these books cannot be reconsidered for a certain amount of time period. And that once the decision is made, that decision stays in effect for this certain amount of time period. And only after that time period can it be relooked at. It's we have to start thinking, like, you have to get into such minutia. I mean, I think I looked at this when I was writing this, I changed everything like 100 times, like, because I kept being like, oh, I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that. Like, you have to think of the minutia because that's what it becomes.
So very briefly, let me just, recap what I learned through all of this. First and foremost, I learned to take better care of Martha. I'm a workaholic. I, have been in the habit for the last 45 years of my working life of just working all the time. That's not productive. So take care of yourself mentally, physically, whatever. Pay attention. What happened to me in September with Genderqueer and Law and Boy should not have been a surprise if I had been keyed into ALA, Office of Intellectual Freedom's newsletter that comes out every Friday saying what's going on. Because those reports had been there, I just, let it sit in my inbox and wasn't paying attention. Don't take it personally. It's not about you. It feels like it, but anyone who holds the title librarian, they go after. It's not about Martha Hickson. It's librarian. It's not really even about the books. It's about politics. It's about power. It's about culture. It could be any books, as I've just demonstrated. It's not going to stop with those 5. It's not going to stop with the 16. It's going to keep going. And then they're only books. It's paper, ink, and glue. They're going to leave your library at some point anyway through the weeding process. If you lose one, I know these circumstances aren't ideal, but you have other books in your collection on that topic, and it's not more important than your health. No matter what, this process, the reconsideration ordeal is an opportunity for you to re-examine your policies and processes, as I have done in these last few months. And you'll see the results of that. I have attached all the new things I'm doing. And I think you've heard me say over and over again, don't stop. Just when you think you've run out of ideas, a new idea is going to come to you. Remember, I had David Levithan show up, or something lucky might happen. You might meet, John Kraska from every library, or you'll get some wacky creative idea like sending holiday cards. Just keep going. Let your brain go wild.
Martha has been so great about that, and I have to say, I have to add to that a little in a not like in a, I don't mean to be like a scared way, but it can happen to any of us. It doesn't matter how many awards you have or how many things that happen. It really, any of us can be affected by it. And it is true that taking care of yourself and getting help for yourself is very, very important. And it's okay to cry. It's okay to break down, and it's okay to not be okay, but you know that there are people there that will help you. And so I think that that's so important. Sorry, I just needed to say that. So, okay, so how do we train our administrators in BOE? You need to explain to them the needs for diverse resources. And that's so important. And we all know it's important. And in the state of New Jersey, there are so many standards and laws that assist in that, to say that there's a Holocaust policy, there's LGBTQ standards we have to hit, there are Amistad curriculum standards we have to hit, there's diversity standards. So we need those diverse resources to be able to hit the policies and the resources that the state is saying we must teach. So you have stuff out there that tells you that that's there, and you can justify the purchases of them just from the standards in most states or that you have out there. So you need to explain for the idea of the need for diverse resources, but it also needs to be not just diverse resources in terms of like religion or ethnicity, but also gender. And that's really important. You have to explain the relevant policies and explain to people what the policies are and the regulations are and exactly what happens, what they should be following. So it's not only like 2530 with, which is our one where it talks about like having diverse resources in your classroom, but it's also, they need to be following their own policy on public complaints and how complaints are talked about. You know, how things are done. you can't just like write up a teacher for something. It should be like, there's a whole steps and processes that should be going into that. And there's public complaint policies in place for that. And you also need to make sure that it's not just the policies, but the regulations. And that is very important. So most policies have a regulation on how does the school district deal with those. Now, the Board of Ed doesn't itself write the regulations. That's left up to the district administrators. The board can like suggest, but they can't, push, like write them specifically. But you need to also make sure the regulations are good. I have put and included in the Wakelet the regulations, the sample regulations that I suggested to the administration, and the administration met with our librarians to talk about, and they also liked it. So it seems we're going with those regulations. I've included, the policies that we've written. And what Martha talks about first is very important. Now that there is one school district who's done this, it makes everybody feel a little better. Because, okay, well, we have a school district that's done this, so I'm not the first one. Look, there's their policy. And people are lazy also. So if we can find other people's policies and take bits and pieces from them, because those have been vetted by lawyers and others, it's a lot easier. I mean, I'll tell you, I took a lot of the policies and I put in the Wakelet from a school district in Florida that has a really great policy in there. So, having use what's already out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can show your administrators and your people and that those things are available for you. And remember, continue to use the word proactive instead of reactive. You don't want to be in this situation. Remind them all the time. You don't want to be like North Voorhees, where they just had to go through that. I know that sucks, but for once, you don't want to be them. Let's not be these people. Let's be proactive. And then also, as I spoke about, simple language is possible so that we can get there. Also, and I talked about this a little, but I think it's important to realize that as Board of Ed members, you're expecting the librarians to come out and speak against the books. You're expecting maybe some parents and that. You're not as much expecting the students. So anytime you can get student voice is very important. You're not expecting others like authors or like heads of organizations or government officials. Those are the type of people that are going to be helpful in this fight, because the other people, like, as much as I love Martha, if Martha comes to speak, I know what Martha's going to say, and so I'm expecting that, but I'm not expecting it if I'm hearing from others or all the teachers come in are saying it, that's where it's more important. I hope that helps.
So I think we're done with our presentation portion. I know that we have to go back to Shannon, and we might have just a couple minutes for questions as well.
We went a little over the 45, sorry.
Totally okay. That was wonderful. You guys are such an inspiration. And as you can see, people have been writing in the comments. Does anybody have any questions for Martha and Elissa? We have a couple minutes for questions.
I'm going to put the link to the Wakelet right here for everybody. I'm putting it in the chat. I also put it on I just tweeted it out, so you'll find it on my Twitter too, Elissa Malespina, so you can get those resources. And in it has like the policies that are from South Orange Maplewood. We have one from Florida that I was talking about. I have the regulations that we worked on. I have, I used Martha's. I will say to you, I really picked Martha's brain for the request for reconsider materials form that I did. But now I'm also going to pick Martha's brain because I didn't know she had written like a reconsideration committee like form thing. I'm going to totally pick her brain for that. But
I think it might be in the.
it might be. And I also have like laws against censorship challenge that, and Jaisal, who's our work, you know, like put together for us. Martha has this incredible book emergency toolkit that I have linked here too in the Wakelet. And Jaisal, which is the New Jersey School Library Associations, I have their information and resource kit there too. And then I just put in here like I wrote a letter to the school board about the challenge, Martha's challenge, and I wrote it as a school board member. So if you can get like other school board members to write to another school board member, that takes on a whole different range because you can talk to them in a way that others can't. So when I wrote my letter, it was written like as a school board member and as a librarian and as somebody who like has used your policy. That's going to make things feel like a little different. You know, so those are, I put that in there too.
We have a couple of questions in the chat that I can address really quickly. Susan has asked, what was staff support like? Thank you for asking that question, Susan. It was, I'm going to say, for the most part, they were supportive. My union reps were very supportive, but I do have to say that there are some staff who shun me. That they believe what they heard at the board meeting. And they believe that I'm distributing pornography and have shunned me. That's all I can say about that. And I'm not spending my time trying to convince them otherwise. I think that's not a good use of my time or effort. And then Becky asked a great question. What about having a youth public librarian on the Reconsideration Committee? Actually, in this case, we did. I had recommended to my administration that I not be the librarian who sits on the Reconsideration Committee for purposes of transparency and credibility. Because the protesters are going after me by name, it seemed disingenuous to have me be the person who's evaluating the materials to which they object. So we actually did reach out to one of the public librarians in the community who sat on that Reconsideration Committee. But that's a great idea.
I like that. I didn't think of that. Now I'm like, maybe.
Someone else.
Oh, and we do need to know Shannon's yelling at us, so we have to go soon.
Okay.
But
No, I'm not.
Karen asked, how did other staff feel about this? If you're asking maybe about my library staff, it's just me and a clerk, and my library clerk has been so absolutely wonderful. She's gone to every board meeting with me. We were out together last night at the board meeting, and she has stood by me 100%. And I think Casey had her hand up too.
Yeah.
I saw Casey.
Go ahead, Casey, and ask your question.
Hey, real quick, do you think it would be a good idea to be proactive and give a presentation to your staff? And, you know, in terms of it's coming, not that we think it may happen, but it's coming, and this is the process that we're going to go through. Would that
Most
be beneficial?
definitely. Most definitely, because here's the thing, it doesn't affect just the library. I mean, as our friends in Florida, our math teachers in Florida can tell us, this is not just about the library. It's starting here, but it's coming for them.
No, I think anything you can do, or if you're a state that is a union state, work with your union too, because they're going to support you in stuff like this. So make sure that they have knowledge and information on how this works and what happens and how to help you. Because when you're going through it, the amount of people that you can have to help you is going to be so important. And, you know, and so as many people who can be there to help you, it makes things a little better.
And I think we have one more question from Becky.
Sure, Becky.
Actually, that was my question about having the youth public librarian.
Okay.
And that's because in my district, I'm a library supervisor. I'm not a certified media specialist. Mm-hmm. So it felt like having a certified librarian on the committee would be important.
I will say, Becky, how I wrote regulation for our school, it had to be a certified public librarian, not from the school, like per se, that you know, like we have like a head librarian, so we put that person in charge, but I also like a public librarian too. And I didn't think of that. I think that's a great addition.
Yeah, this was a great conversation, and you guys will have their information. So if you have other questions for Martha or Elissa, both of them, you can always reach out to. But thank you so much, my friends, for being part of our webinar today. And I just want to share a few things as we wrap up. I wanted to share where you can find more information about Future Ready Librarians on our website. We actually have something new, a new one coming very, very soon. I wanted to share the self-reflection tool and also the conversation starter as well, because this is a good place too. So timely in this conversation, because these are also wonderful tools to use when you're sitting down and having conversations or just reflecting to how your year went. We have a great podcast. We're on season 4 and have had some really good ones this time too around the same topics. Martha and Elissa have both been guests, and Carolyn and Becky from Texas have been guests. So it's just been really nice to be able to go back to these two and just reflect and find help that we need, and even share them as well with others within your school. I think it's been really helpful for a lot of people when they're having just open conversations about topics that pop up about anything as a librarian. And so you can go there and check those out too. We have all of our webinars. I think we're into almost the 6th year of these. And so they are all curated and you can find them on the site. And just remember to stay engaged. Like I said in the beginning, if you have a question, if you have something you want to share, we're always looking for just great, conversations and part of the community that we can all be, together and part of this. It's been great to be at TLA this week because of that. We all have, it's April, we have a few weeks of school left and we need each other. And so please join us in the community and reach out if you need anything. And we're always here to just help you and be supportive too. But you can find Future Ready Librarians on Facebook and also on Twitter. And using these hashtags is just a great way to have that conversation. So we have a lot of things coming up in the next few months that we're going to announce soon. We're going to have a book club this summer and more things too that are happening in the fall. But this has been just such a great conversation, and I'm thankful that you guys joined us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And have a great end of your school year.